Hello and welcome back to Hey, I Like, the podcast where we talk about all things that make our little neurodivergent brains go bonkers. We are joined today by my good friend PiffPaff, who is now going to introduce themselves and tell us what we're going to be talking about today.
Hi, I'm Piff. I also go by PiffPaff. I am a junior in my college undergrad, and I'm really into the art of storytelling in all types of media. And today we are talking about the trope of the strong female character. And today it's not actually technically I do like the trope if it's done right, and that's what we're gonna get into.
Yes. I think that most tropes sort of fall into that category of things that we like if they're done well. And if they're not done well, they're not something that we like.
Exactly. And so what I'm going to focus on in the beginning is actually the stuff I don't like about it and, you know, the mainstream idea of the strong female character and how like that has its issues. And then after I talk about that, I'm going to get into where it does look good and how you can use that trope in a enlightening and fresher way that appeals to the audience that it's supposed to appeal to. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And if you don't, I'll talk about it.
Well, I know what you mean. It's just whether everyone else does at home.
Yeah. Also, we've talked about this like before, so
Yes. For people listening at home, this is the second time we've recorded this episode because I was an idiot and lost the first recording. So, yeah. So, take two, let's go. Where are we starting today?
Okay. Well, I guess what we'll start with is, I guess let's talk about what the strong female character trope to you is, like, or the first thing you think about when you hear that, whether it's negative or positive. Just like, what do you think when you hear about it?
I mean, we're here to talk about what you think about it, but
Yes, I know, but I need you to work with me, babe.
I guess when I think of the strong female character, it inherently goes in with that sort of strong, independent woman who don't need no man kind of thing. The whole feisty girl who is really physically capable and physically strong, which I think is the exact interpretation of the trope that we both don't like.
Exactly.
So why that's my first thought when I hear that, I don't know, but yeah.
Well, it's probably because the context of this is, repeated between us.
Yeah.
But that's honestly, yes, that is exactly what I think of as well. In the same sense, like for me, a strong female character trope, when you first say that to me, my first emotion is typically negative. And, that shouldn't be the case because I really love seeing female-led stories or,
Yeah.
other genders other than just a cis male. But, hey, that's my initial thoughts when I hear that is first of all negative, and then I also think of a character that is probably in an action movie of some sort, or yeah, in an action movie and is probably physically very capable, yeah, like a fighter or something, and is also someone who has a very strong personality, kind of brash,
Yeah.
sometimes a little more masculine of a personality, and that's where I want to start off. So one of the things that I'm going to use as my example right now is a movie and book, well, mainly a book series that was recently made into a Netflix movie or two. I didn't watch the second one though because it was bad. But yes, so this is a book series called the Enola Holmes series. I don't know how many people have heard of it, the actual book series itself, but I do feel like a lot more people have been exposed to um, the fandom, I guess, through Netflix's adaptation of the book. But
Yeah.
what I
Like
wanted to do,
I know I've heard about the Netflix, but I hadn't heard about the books before you mentioned
yes,
it. So
exactly, which is really sad because the books are the best thing in the world. They were my
yeah.
whole childhood, and I still read them as an adult, and they're still really good. But we're not here to talk about how, book and movie adaptations like are always, difficult to do and kind of messed up at times. That's not what I wanted to talk about was the fact that because the reason these two are so different from each other, and a lot of people who have read the books really disliked the movie, is that the the basis of the character, the lead character, the strong female character, in both of them had very different, I guess, roots, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
When you look at the movie, actually, let's start with the book. Better. When you look at the book series, this is the premise is basically this is Sherlock Holmes' younger sister, and her mother goes missing, and she's going through trying to solve mysteries while also um, evading her brothers trying to put her into a boarding school so that she becomes a proper Victorian woman, quote unquote, because she's not one. She's very atypical in that sense. And the main thing about her character is that she is able to solve mysteries, find her mother, this and that and the other, because what she does is she focuses on the things that are so integral to women and so associated with women that they're often overlooked. That's how she's able to evade her brothers and solve things and save people before her brothers can even try to. Some of the examples of this is like she deciphers codes that are stitched in through embroidery on a dress. She does things like, pay attention to the color of wax seal. She pays attention to the language of flowers. That's how she finds her mother and all these. It's kind of spoilery, by the way. My bad, but not too spoilery. But yes, I mean, a lot of these things, and also the language of fans. But yes, a lot of these things these tools that she uses to find and solve and basically, do her own thing and be the center of a story and effectively do so is by focusing on things that are traditionally associated with women and things that she herself has never discounted, even though she has not herself been capable of doing.
Yeah.
This is going to come up later. But
Yes.
in the movies, however, I haven't seen the second one, so I'm just going to say movie actually, because I don't even know if the second one has released or not, and I'm probably not going to watch it because the first one sucked so bad. But the movies, on the other hand, had this thing where it used Enola Holmes as a character, and it used the story of a sort. But what it did to Enola as a female character was did the exact thing that you see in almost every live action movie to date. You see a strong female character in the form of one whose main focus is on her fighting capability. Immediately in the movies, like there's barely any deductive reasoning, there's barely any focus on the language of flowers or any sort of feminine things that she straight up actually says, I don't care for embroidery and this and that and the other, and paints it in a very negative light, which is the exact, when I tell you, it is the exact opposite of a quote that she said in the book, like word for word, the exact opposite. Yeah, I'm serious.
Yikes.
It's
Because,
ridiculous.
like, that
It
then
is
implies that
character
they have read
assassination.
the books
Yes, they
and know
have. No,
exactly what she said and deliberately
I think that's what
reversed it.
killed me because Millie Bobby Brown herself, when like before the movie came out, was telling people about like how she read the books and stuff like that, and that's how she guided her performance and the storytelling of this movie. And then I watched the movie and I was like, wow, you're fucking illiterate. My bad, I cursed, but yeah. Like, okay, you clearly have no understanding for the character that you're deciding to play, and even though you read the book, you basically looked at it, shat on it, and wiped your ass with it. Like, you did none of your homework. My bad. Like, how? How can you read this book and get that out of it? Especially, another thing that really bothered me was like, again, Enola, knowing that her brothers would assume that she would take up masculine disguises and disguise herself as a male to run away from them because she is a more tomboyish character, actually leans into the idea of being a woman, and her first few disguises are either of an old woman, a seamstress, an older school teacher, or also just a straight up beautiful woman, like a conventionally beautiful woman, full makeup, you know, dress and stuff like that, all of it.
Yeah.
And she uses that as her strength. And again, I'll get into this a little later, but in the movie, however, the first thing, literally in the books, the only time she dressed up as a man was in the last book, and it was only once. In
Yeah.
the movie, the first thing she does is dress up as a boy, and she consistently does so. There's at least 2, 3 times in that movie. Only I think it was once or twice that she actually dressed up as a woman, and I think the one time she did, it was the same outfit the full time. So it wasn't a different disguise; it was just one.
Well, that's a
The reason
disappointment.
it really is, and I think the main thing that bothered me about it, like, again, you can change different aspects of a story, that's fine, But when you change it fundamentally by basically taking all the aspects of a character that make her a strong one and basically flush it down the toilet and use more conventionally, yeah, it's so painful. I think my issue especially is like when she dresses up as a woman, when she does that, when she leans into it, what it allows her to do is talk more directly to women, understand women better, this and that and the other. It's things that she's able to get into places that men aren't because they really just don't care to in that story. And it also highlights like that women have strengths other like that aren't typically perceived as strengths in a more patriarchal society. Like having emotional intelligence, all these things that, attention to detail in conversation, and also things like, gift giving and all those sort of household conventions, if not like social conventions that women are typically more expected to know about than men. That sort of thing is what makes her character so important and so effective. And by taking all that and instead replacing it with things that are effectively like, the most appreciated aspects or like the most important aspects of masculinity and male power fantasy, and using that to describe her as a strong female character in the movie, it it fundamentally changes what her character is, and it kind of just destroys the point of the story itself.
Yeah.
The point is that she is capable of doing these things being a woman, not despite being a woman, but because of being a woman. Meanwhile, in the movies, it's more of a she can do this despite being a woman because she doesn't act like a woman. She acts like a man. And so that's where I kind of wanted to segue into like what I mean by a strong female character in a good sense versus a bad. Kind of a long segue, but I need to set the stage.
Yes.
When it comes to a strong female character, when you see those action movies and stuff like that, when you watch things and the first thing that is so blatantly obvious is that it is a woman who does not want to be a woman or does not want to act like a woman. And I'm not using this, I mean like, women are incredibly diverse, both gender, race, ethnicity, all of those things. All of it. We are
Yeah.
so diverse. Now like there's no definition of a woman. When I say that she doesn't want to act like a woman, I mean that she actively describes activities and pastimes that are associated with women, or like emotional states that are associated with women, like for example being in love, finding, being a significant other, wanting to be in a relationship, all those things that are typically associated with like femininity or motherhood or sisterhood, all those things, any sort of thing that's associated with a woman's realm in typical society, those are things that they actively distance themselves from in the quote unquote strong female character of your typical mainstream media.
Yeah.
And I don't like that because it's just, it's just another male character with tits,
Yeah.
like there's
Basically.
there's no there's really nothing. It's just He-Man with a boob job, I guess. Like there's nothing there's just no substance to it, It's like how can you, because I think the worst part is when you're talking about this trope, it's somehow I feel like directors and people who write these stories act like having this strong female character will appeal to women, but they also want to appeal to like a male power fantasy. So
Yeah.
it's weird because like they want to appeal to women, but I feel like a lot of women don't actually relate to this character, you know? Because it's
Yeah.
like how can you relate to something that's just so one dimensional, I guess? Because they really don't give the woman as many dimensions as a man is allowed to have in this situation.
Yeah.
Because a man, a strong, like, a male lead character can have a significant other, can have you know, a backstory, can have friends, can have this and that and the other. He can have a lot of different dimension to them, but a female character of the same, I guess, fighting caliber or like status cannot have those sorts of things, lest those things be attributed to weaknesses and make her a less interesting character. if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think you're right. It's quite rare to see female characters who are depicted as being like strong.
Multidimensional.
Yeah, well, multidimensional, but also like strong characters who have interests that are traditionally feminine.
Yes, exactly.
The most common interpretation of a strong female character is one who completely shuns everything that is considered feminine or like a womanly role or whatever. And it's always sort of portrayed as this really progressive thing, like women don't have to be housewives and have children and get married and whatever. And it's like, but it's not. You're just taking all the things that you would give to a male character, making them worse and shoving it on a female character in the name of being progressive, but you're not actually really doing anything with it. You're not doing anything interesting.
Well,
it makes me angry.
For sure. And here's the thing, right? Like, you're talking about a progressive kid. They want progressiveness, right? They're like, oh, having a strong female character makes us look like we are, breaking boundaries. But are you look at it? Are you really?
I think the important part of that is it looks like
yes, exactly.
they're doing it. They're not actually doing anything, and they don't even want to do it for the sake of like benefiting storytelling or like appealing to a female demographic at all. They're doing it so that they can stick a label on it that says we've got a female character.
Yeah. And I think it's especially because, like, think about it. Before, assume there isn't a strong female character. Assume we haven't even talked about like any of this stuff. Typically in our society, things that are associated with femininity are associated as lesser than or weaker, just culturally. And then you go into taking a strong female character and you tell her to shun those things, just like the men are doing, and then act like a man. So you're just doubling down on the sexism and the misogyny, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? You're just doubling down on it, and you're like, oh, well, it's okay to think it's lesser than because this woman does too. And it's like, well, was the woman written by a man, first of all? Anyways.
Like, you're still saying that you can't be a strong woman unless you are doing male things.
Exactly. It's the same story over and over again, and it's not as progressive as people want to think it is, especially writers, and it's time it was acknowledged. So again, what I mean by a strong female character, when I see it in a good light personally, I mean it in a way that a character is, even if they are physically strong, they can be physically strong. They can be they don't have to be. Regardless, I don't need them to have any sort of defining concept of like, oh, they're a fighter, oh, they're like a healer, oh, they're this and that and the other. It doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that like the essence of the character is multidimensional and is not one that I guess doubles down on the sexism. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It needs a little more than just one-dimensional, I can fight and I don't want to be like other girls, because that's what the whole thing is. It's literally just, I'm not like other girls.
Which is
toxic.
Yeah.
It just perpetuates the same thing, that like you have to fit into a very specific convention and a very specific like personality for other people to take you seriously and other people to like you. And I'd like to see a strong female character that doesn't have to be liked, that doesn't have to be strong, that can do whatever the hell she wants and still have enough substance to carry a story, because that is the most important thing. The story, that's the reason these characters exist. They're telling a story. And I think the hardest part is to read, like, movies and read books and watch movies and see all these TV shows and look at all these new authors as well who are also perpetuating this thing where they need to have this character there's typically a female, like young adult novels, all of them lately, it's just, a female character is the lead, but she barely has enough substance to carry the story on her own. She has to have like a love triangle or this or that and the other, you know what I mean? Have enough herself as a character to carry it.
And that is
because of
why I
that,
don't read YA fiction.
it's so difficult because it's like I love fantasy and I cannot find a fantasy book that isn't YA. And like I think the
They
problem is like
definitely
even YA,
exist.
they do exist. I know. And the thing is like even if you want to read YA, like the problem is YA is so associated with these tropes themselves along with like other really annoying ones that like you cannot find it's very rare for you to find a YA book that doesn't have. And I also
Yeah.
find that really concerning, and that's another thing I was going to get into with this topic is that if you look at the movies and the TV shows that are aimed towards young adult readers, so that'd be around, late middle school to, all the way up to probably college readers as well. And honestly, a lot of people read YA even if they're not of those age ranges. But again, those stories that you're seeing with, a character and even movies as well nowadays, but movies typically don't really have, because they're on streaming, it's not like it really has an age range like restriction, so anyone
Yeah.
can watch them. All these stories tell the same thing, that like there's something inherently wrong with wanting to not be a fighter or not be it's just like it's again it's just ingraining this story of women and their interests being subpar compared to men's, but across
Yeah.
generations, and it's just seeding it in younger and younger, you know? And it's funny because you talk about it like this, right? But when you look at books that were aimed towards young children, and when you talk about books that were aimed towards, and the TV shows that were aimed towards kids like younger than them, the younger age group,
Yes.
that
Yeah.
is somewhere where you actually don't usually see the idea that a woman has to be strong in some sort of like you're conventionally like literally strong as a female character and
Yes.
like not like a boy or like a male or any sort of you know patriarchal standards. You look at those
Yeah.
stories and they really heavily lean into like the really girly stuff or like like the really like pink and frilly kind of thing. And it's funny because they still are able to have like a personality and they're still able to tell a story through those characters. I mean, I don't know if you've watched Shira, but Shira
I
and the
have,
Princesses of
yeah.
Power, yeah, that's one example, that every single female character, female and male character actually in that story, and every gender in between actually, because they had a very really diverse like character cast, but every single character in that story through had incredible character arcs, had incredible self development, and also had really staple personality traits that didn't make them 2D, even though it's literally 2D animation. Like they were
Yeah.
able to make such full characters in a way that a lot of books, TVs, movies, etc. like have no concept of. They are just completely unable to do it. And I think it's really wild to me.
Yeah. Because, like, thinking about it, a lot of the books that are particularly good at sort of portraying female characters who are strong in their own right, but not necessarily in a sort of traditionally masculine way, rather than like sort of the happy medium between the girls who are all pretty in pink and not able to do anything, and the stereotype of the strong female character TM. Often those books are the ones that are for, I don't want to say middle grade because that's not what like kind of thing that we have here, but like sort of age sort of 9 to 12, just before you hit the teen
Yeah.
and YA sort of thing, but after you've sort of graduated from the really young kids books. And that's when you tend to sort of see the most diverse and most like three-dimensional characters. I think even going into adult fiction, you still quite often see the same sorts of tropes, especially sort of new adult. So, maybe there's a reason that a lot of us are incredibly nostalgic for the books that we read when we were at sort of the end of primary school,
Yes.
beginning of secondary school.
Honestly. because it just feels like everything is the same now. And
Yeah.
I think I guess it's concerning to me because clearly if this trope is something that is present in so many books and movies and TV shows that are upcoming like now and have continued to have been like upcoming, then clearly there is some sort of appeal to people about this. Like this I mean, I'm not saying everyone likes it, but clearly enough people like it that it's perpetuating, trope. It hasn't
Yeah.
stopped. I haven't seen it slow down any. So I'm just like, it's sad because like when you have movies like Birds of Prey, for example, where you have like actually strong female characters in the physical sense, but also like the um I guess emotional and like there are so many other aspects of them just besides being strong, and very like, it is very defiant against ever leaning into the idea that they have to be masculine to be strong. Like it's very strongly against that idea.
Yeah.
Movies like that don't do well, like critically and
Yeah.
sometimes even audience wise. And so it's like it's concerning because it's like, well, I'm not even sure where to go from there. It's like how can you it just concerns me like why is it that we like still feel this need to have to conform to patriarchal stereotypes and patriarchal values to feel like we are worthy of being a strong female character of our own lives and of our own stories, the ones that we write, the ones that we tell, the ones that we live.
Yeah. My sort of question, I guess, in terms of everything is sort of everything is the same and everything is sort of drawing on this sort of trope and how it must be popular because of that would be, is it a self-fulfilling prophecy in that because there's so much of it around, you can't find things that don't fulfill that trope, and therefore the publishers and the sort of studio executives think that it is popular because it's what's selling, but it's only selling because it's the only thing that's there. Um, but
Yeah,
then
honestly.
because that's what's selling, nothing else gets a look in because ultimately publishers and studios and things are looking for things that sell.
Hmm.
They don't like to take risks. So
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
it's
It's
very
crazy.
difficult to navigate.
And it's just so frustrating to me as a reader.
Yes. And
Because it's like,
it's frustrating to me too because like I have to teach kids
yeah,
who
exactly. I'm
read all
like,
these things, and it's like I want to find all the good books for them, and there are so many very good books coming out more recently, but a lot of school libraries tend to cling on to the same old books by the same old authors. We're seeing a lot of stuff about Roald Dahl at the moment in the media, um, and there's
mm,
not a lot of room for schools to move away from the old crowd. But
yeah, for
a lot of the
sure.
stuff that is new, because there's been so much of the same stuff, a lot of the stuff that's new isn't necessarily good. It's very commercialized, so you have to be very careful. And I don't have the time to read
Yeah,
all of that.
for sure. And I think it's the same thing like if you're looking for a movie, right? I mean, often we're like, oh, okay, well, does it pass the special test? But it's like, does it even matter? Like, a lot of movies do, but they're still really misogynistic.
Yeah. Like
So
that
it's
was
like,
literally meant to be, that's the bar is on the
the bare
floor, guys.
minimum. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, oh, well, this movie did that. I mean, technically, Enola Holmes did. And I'm like, and what about it? Like,
It doesn't
it
make it
doesn't
good.
matter. It really doesn't. And it's like, how can you use this as a baseline? Like, it's really sad that that's what our baseline is.
Yes.
Because, I mean, here we are, we're begging and bleeding for diversity of skin color, ethnicity, um, gender, and identity, and sexual orientation, and all of these things on camera and on like any sort of form of media. But does it even matter? Because we can't give these people, these genders, these all of these things, we can't give them any sort of depth of character. It doesn't matter. We're still conforming to the white patriarchal design, it doesn't matter if you have a Muslim character because she doesn't act like when she acts like the most, whitewashed and I guess, you know, sanitized version that you could possibly provide and calling
Yeah.
it representation. Same thing goes with a gay character and like a gay couple with a child. The same thing goes with female characters, like we were just talking about. It's really hard to talk about diversity in film and in books when it's done in such not fan servicey, but like it's done in such a sanitized way that there's really nothing, there's no substance to it. And I
Yeah.
think it's just a fear of being controversial or not liked. Because I think the thing is that movies and books and all those things that appeal that, do have a not quote unquote strong female character, but a female lead that has substance to her, or any sort of lead that has substance to them, by having that and having it like be genuinely and truly of itself, like its own identity, rather than having to, submit itself to the whims of other people and, the cultural ideologies. The problem is when you want to appeal to like the truth of that sort of topic, you lose so much of the audience, I guess, because it's not
Yeah.
meant for a lot of people, or like a lot of people are just only looking for the sanitized versions. It can't relate to anything other than that now. So it's just
Which
hard.
is really depressing.
It's really, really sad because the stories that need to be told, the stories that are worth being heard, are not the stories that we get to hear. Because the ones that we
Yeah.
do get to hear are the ones that are appeal to the widest audience base, which is typically, you know, your Western audience. And your
Yeah.
Western audience, unfortunately, is very, very brainwashed by I guess brainwashed is a little harsh, but still brainwashed in a sense by the white patriarchal society or societal values.
Yeah.
It's quite unfortunate and it's depressing.
It is.
But I guess, like, I don't even know where to go from there. It's like this is kind of depressing. I'm realizing this episode. But what I mean is, there are a lot of stories that I want to hear.
Yeah.
And I feel like there are so many books and stuff and movies that do have that substance. Like, for example, Everything Everywhere All at Once. Again, the
Yes.
Enola Holmes series. Other like book series and stories, even older ones, like ones even like Shakespeare had
Yes.
strong female characters that, maybe on your first read you think, oh, this is just like a really stereotypical like hysterical woman, or like a really, the typical, you know coy and I guess suspicious woman. But the thing is, when you look at those characters and you're on a reread, if you actually go like and look at the text and look at the themes and stories that Shakespeare is trying to tell, you realize that his characters are not all one dimensional. His female characters especially have a lot to offer, and I feel like a lot of times are exploiting the loopholes that society placed on them in terms of societal, I mean, cultural norms for them. Like they use the things that are typically associated with them in a negative way, and they use it to their advantage.
Yeah. Now, I know the last time we had this discussion, we each had a Shakespeare example of
Mhm.
a strong female character who was not like what we would consider in the modern day interpretation of like what a strong female character is. So,
Mhm.
are we going to repeat that bit, or is that too
We can
tangential?
if you'd like. I think I really want to hear yours again because I really like the way you talked about yours, and I'll
Oh,
before we can talk about, instead of going into my Shakespeare ones, so we don't have two Shakespeare things. I can obviously go into like Jane Austen or something like that
yeah.
instead, so it doesn't sound
Um,
like it's all the same.
I
But
basically am incredibly enthusiastic about Shakespeare because my degree was in English, so we did a lot of Shakespeare. But one of the Shakespeare plays I think that are the most complex in terms of their characters and their character arcs and their plots are they're known as the problem plays. So they're ones that don't fit neatly into the definitions of comedy, tragedy, or history. There's a couple of them. They include like The Tempest, but the one that I love The Tempest so much, but my favourite Shakespeare character of all time is from Measure for Measure, which is another one of the problem plays, and her name is Isabella, and she is an ace icon, I swear. But they didn't have that terminology then, so you're not allowed to use it in an academic context. But all the signs are there, I'm telling you. So for context, for people who haven't read this play or seen it, the play is set in Vienna in a time when a lot of laws were being passed that made like sexual activity and promiscuity really illegal. It like carried the death penalty, kind of illegal. And Isabella wants to be a nun, so she wants to go into the convent. She's very religious, but her reasoning for going into the convent and becoming a nun is not necessarily because she's really religious. That's just sort of a side effect. The reason why she wants to go into the convent is because she doesn't want to get married and have sex with people, specifically that reason. Not that she doesn't not that she doesn't want to get involved with womanly activities or be like a typical woman or anything like that. It's got nothing to do with any kind of upset at her gender. It is just that she doesn't like the idea of having sex with people, which I can relate to. So Isabella's brother is not like her. He wants to get married to this girl. They are engaged, but before they can get married, he gets his fiancée pregnant. So he is locked up in prison and scheduled to be executed because of all these new laws about sexual activity. So Isabella is like, no, thank you. I don't want my brother to be executed. He's my only family. So she goes to the guy who is basically acting as the Duke, because the Duke is gone somewhere. He just like leaves his second in command in charge for a while and says, I'm leaving now, bye. He comes back, it's fine.
Oh.
But yeah, so he leaves his second in command in charge, and his name is Angelo. And Angelo is very puritanical. That's why all these laws are being passed. So Isabella goes to him and is just like, so I know that what my brother did was wrong, but also consider he's my brother and I would like him to not die. And Angelo's response to this is basically, I'll let him go if you have sex with me.
Oh my god.
So he's blackmailing her, which is fun. But she doesn't stand for any of that nonsense. I believe he sort of falls in love with her because she's really smart and is really good at debating with him. They get this back and forth going quite quickly in that they both sort of hate each other, and it's very obvious that they hate each other, but they get this back and forth going that's really interesting to listen to. Not like in a Beatrice and Benedict from Much Ado About Nothing kind of way where it's funny because they're insulting each other. They're both very clever people debating with each other, and it's fascinating, honestly. They're very sort of evenly matched in terms of debating skills. So he falls in love with her because of that. But she is not very impressed with his proposition. And basically tells him to his face that she would rather die than have sex with anybody, which is great. Love that. Thank you for the ace rep, Shakespeare. And her master plan that she comes up with the help of the Duke, who has returned in disguise as a monk, is to find the woman that Angelo was meant to marry and kind of skipped out on and abandoned. And trick Angelo into thinking that he is having sex with Isabella when actually he's having sex with his ex-fiancée, and then because they've slept together they then have to get married.
Oh, wow.
So they trick him into upholding his end of the deal.
That's hilarious.
But it's basically like a for the majority of the play, with the exception of Angelo, who is the villain, the male characters kind of take the back seat. It's very much a sort of a female empowerment kind of play, but in the sense of the women are not using their physical strength. They're using
They're using their
their
cunning.
brains, they're using their cunning, they're using their sexual wiles, I guess, but
And
not
that
in a
is
sort of not in a
no,
sort
yeah.
of a weird, seductive kind of way, but like in a we know that the men are stupid and will fall for it kind of way. Um, and it's really interesting because it's the kind of thing that if it was written in the modern day and you read it without knowing who it was written by, you would assume it was written by a woman.
No, and
Because
so
they
yeah.
win in the end, their plan works. um, but yeah, it's a fascinating play, and it's a problem play because it sort of fulfills all the tick boxes of a comedy, because there's a wedding at the end, it's about romance, there are jokes in it. Some quite risque jokes, there's
Hey,
a lot
that's
of
just Shakespeare,
shoots in
man.
this play. But it's a problem play because it gets quite dark in places. Like it's a social commentary basically, but
Mm.
there's a lot of stuff going on that isn't very funny at all. The very last scene features Isabella being proposed to by the Duke, and it's an open-ended play in that the Duke proposes, and it is not written into the play how she responds to that proposal. So different directors and different productions will either not portray a reaction, they will like draw the curtains while they're still sort of standing around staring at each other. they will they will either have her accepting the proposal, normally by not necessarily saying anything because the lines aren't written into the play, but by taking his hand and dancing with him, or they will show her rejecting him outright by turning away and walking off. But it's very, very rare to see a production where they don't have some kind of physical representation of an answer from her, even though that is not written into the play. Because having it just end with sort of a "Hey, will you marry me?" and then the curtains close, is the kind of thing that audiences, I guess, statistically don't like. But that is probably how it would have been performed in Shakespeare's time, and so it's quite
Right.
interesting to see different productions of it and see how they grapple with this fact that it's a problem play. Do you play it as a comedy? Do you play it as a tragedy? Do you play it straight and just go make up your own mind? How do you do this ending? Do you show her accepting it? Do you show her rejecting it? Do you not show any response at all? How do you do it? It's interesting to watch. I've only ever seen it in theaters once, but I would 100% go again. But you have to go into it with the knowledge of what happens, because otherwise it's not that you're going to be lost if you don't know what happens, it's that you're going to get blindsided by the fact that this poor girl is getting blackmailed into having sex with a government official on stage. So yeah, so that's my
I
Shakespeare example. That is
and
not
you're
Lady
so
Macbeth. The Tumblr people are going to be so mad about this.
I know, exactly, and honestly, though, I love that because I think automatically people would assume, like, we're gonna talk about Lady Macbeth, which, I mean, yeah, she's great and all, but I think that it's worth talking about other characters, like, other stories, because I want
Yeah,
to show that there are stories out there, you know, that they do exist, and again,
yeah,
when you talk about, Shakespeare, another character for me was, like, Portia from The Merchant of Venice, again, does the same thing, uses her cunning, and manipulates, like, legal, I guess, the laws of their land and, like, the laws of their government that kind of trap people in a situation and using that to get their freedom. For
yeah,
example, with your example, it was she uses those laws to get him to, have to marry someone else. And in a similar way, like, Portia uses those laws to get um her own freedom and like have control over her own money
Yeah.
rather than like, having it be in the control of her husband or her father. So I think another example would definitely be a lot of Jane Austen's work. She has very, female, like all of her stories are female led. And as far as I know, I haven't read all of them, but I'm pretty damn sure none of them have them doing any sort of physical feats of like, you know, your
No.
exactly. They don't have like actual feats of strength by the women, but they are still very strong female characters because they have a lot of personality. They have very defining traits. They have actual wants and needs and desires, and they also have things that they will and won't do, and they have the chance to have character development and all those things. And they can still enjoy female things like they can still want to be in a relationship. They can still um, want to dress up, want to look nice, want to do this and that and the other. Want to be a good sister, a good mother, a good person in their family, like
Yeah.
their familial role. They want to fill up all those social, I guess, those social requirements, or like those social, like typically female, so like social circles. They want to act in those ways. They don't have an issue with that. The issue is more so like trying to find the right person who understands them,
Yeah.
who respects them without having them have to reduce themselves in any sort of manner, or like have to bow to their whims.
Yeah. And I think I remember very vividly having our first seminar at university on Jane Austen, because we got into a sort of debate in our seminar over whether, because we were talking about Pride and Prejudice, and we were talking about whether or not it counted as a feminist text. Because
Absolutely.
obviously the concept of feminism didn't exist yet, but through a modern lens, did it count as feminist literature? And it wasn't really much of a debate because we all pretty much agreed on it. It was just the seminar leader playing devil's advocate and saying, but consider they all end up getting married at the end. They all fall into that sort of social expectation for women at the time. And it's like, exactly. A, it's not actually a problem that they did that. And B, that in and of the fact that they all do that is in and of itself a critique of those social expectations.
Exactly.
Like they never portray Lizzie's friend Charlotte, is that her name?
Yeah, exactly.
They never portray her as like a villain or really criticize her at all for marrying Mr. Collins, even though he is in text a bit of a dick. It's a shame that she felt the need to, and Lizzie obviously feels very upset about it, but
for sure.
It's never like portrayed as the bad option, right? Like it's always portrayed as her protecting herself and her doing what is right for her social standing and her own life.
And I think that it's really interesting.
In that way, she is then being a strong like female character because she is taking control of her own life. Like she is the one who convinced Mr. Collins to propose to her.
Exactly.
Not the other way around. He didn't get rejected by Lizzie and then immediately go next door and go, I'm going to marry her friend instead. He didn't even know she existed. She was the one who persuaded him to do that. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's precisely it. Like, again, it's a social commentary where it's like, well, think about it. If Lizzie cannot, find someone, this might end up having to be her as well. And it's just Lizzie's stubbornness that, propels her to, kind of look elsewhere. But also it's the same thing that she has to work on and realize that, like, I am also being very prejudiced toward this person. And, all the, you gotta know the story. If you don't know the story, read the book. Watch a movie.
Everyone has character growth in this story, and that is an amazing thing.
And I think that's another thing where it's like, I think especially older texts fall into this thing where it's like, oh, is this really a strong female character? And it's like, well, first of all, you have to recognize that the social environment and the customs at that time were not the same.
Yes.
So you didn't have to, like, a strong female character did not, like just a female lead period, did not have to act like a man to be a proper storytelling device.
Yeah.
And there's no, and I think again another thing is like when you're talking about, oh well, these characters get married at the end. Is that a problem? Like, why is it such an issue that if someone wants to have a romantic attachment and decides that yes, I want to get married?
Yeah.
I obviously understand that, like, okay, if your like society forces marriage upon you, or like says like if marriage is not, if you don't get married, then like that's a some sort of like sin, or like it's a bad thing. Obviously that's different, but again, that's a societal thing. I'm not necessarily getting into that. What I mean is that, like, on a basic level, why is it that we expect that a woman, for her to be strong, cannot have emotional attachment?
And I think a lot of it is sort of, we talk a lot about how it's a social commentary, but our idea of what a strong female character is and how that equates to a masculinity, but also in being independent of anyone else,
Mhm.
is sort of a reflection of what our like Western society is like, I guess, and that we as a society very much value people being independent and not needing any support from anyone. Whereas I think it
Absolutely.
would be very different if you were writing from a society like, say, those in like East Asia, where they're a lot more collectivist, where
Mhm.
everything is based on the community. Would a strong, their idea of a strong female character be much different from ours? Would they still value independence the same way, or would they think very differently? Would a strong female character in that sort of society be one who can provide the most for the community? So that's like
Absolutely.
something for people to start thinking about when they are
No,
writing, I guess.
absolutely. Because I mean, I'm Asian. I'm like
Yes.
I'm brown. I come from. I have a lot of roots. I have like my family grew up in the Middle East, but they're both like Indian, Pakistani. Like I grew up in the U.S. There's a lot of like cultural background within my own family, and it's like it's really difficult to see. It's like you have to balance sort of the idea of independence and strength, as in Western society versus like in Middle Eastern Asian society, you know and it's
Yeah.
really interesting when you can see that like a character has more depth to them than just what society expects of them. But also it's really exciting to see people using those differences in society, compared like in different geographical areas across the globe, leaning into that and deciding that, hey, I want to represent something that you don't typically see. Because the problem is that because Western media is so popular, it kind of washes out every other kind of I guess, cultural identity that you can have in books
Mm.
and movies. So you don't get to be exposed to those sorts of stories as much. And I think that just in general, like a diversity of those sorts of stories allows people to see that there are more than just a way to be a strong person. Forget a strong female character, just a strong person in general. Like
Yeah.
have strength and, have a bodied character, someone that has like actual substance to them. You can have so much more if you're willing to look beyond your own bubble.
Yes. And it's the same for anything, I guess. Like,
Absolutely. Everything.
you grow as a person the more you sort of venture out into the wider world. If you're constantly stuck in the exact same environment that you have always been in, with the exact same people and the exact same ideas, you're never going to grow, you're never going to learn anything new. And that is basically what life is all about at the end of the day. So
Absolutely. But I guess what are other stories that you feel like have, or like have you recently seen any movies that actually had like a female character that wasn't like, the tropey strong female character, but like a character that you felt had like essence to them?
I have not seen any recent media in a while. I have not had time for that sort of nonsense. God, I'm sure we had examples last time.
It doesn't have to be recent. If you have anything, honestly anything, because I'm just thinking through my head right now. Like the most recent thing I can think of that I've seen was probably Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to think. 'Cause I literally have not. and so on?
Because
I guess the
within the past year, that's
yeah.
recent enough.
It could
Within
be
the
a book
past
or a movie
year,
or a TV show. Any of those.
yeah,
I'm literally racking my brain right now.
I was rereading a series of books that I read as a child, and there was a fourth one, a newer book that had come out more recently, and I got that from the library. So, and it's going back to that sort of 8 to 12 sort of age demographic. It's when I was sort of 11-ish, trying to think when these books came out, actually. When I was about 11-ish, I was very into the Mysterious Benedict Society, which is a series of books that has recently had a Disney adaptation. And the Disney adaptation, I got halfway through season 1 and dropped because I didn't like the changes they were making. But I know there's a lot of people, not in terms of like anything in particular, just the vibes weren't quite there. They the things they changed were, it didn't jive with me. But I also think that because of how that series and those books worked, it would be very difficult to make a good TV or film adaptation of them, because the fundamental idea of it was that TV and radio is bad and a corrupting influence on people. Specifically the news and the thing, reading books and newspapers and stuff is protecting you from the subliminal messaging. So having Disney, of all companies, make a TV adaptation of it was quite ironic.
So ironic, I know.
But yeah, so it wasn't for me. I know a lot of people like it very much. There are some people who prefer it. That's fine. They're allowed to have their opinions. But in terms of like characters, what I thought was particularly nice about these characters is that, so there's 4 sort of main characters. The 4 children, there are adults as well. And there are 2 boys and 2 girls, and I don't want to say they're representations of, but they all sort of they're all sort of recruited, I guess, in a way, to sign up to fight the bad guys. Because they are smart, but they're all smart in different ways. Right. So I think that reading that kind of thing as a child is quite good for children, because they can see that, just because you're not really book smart and good at remembering facts doesn't mean that you're not inherently valuable. So one of the boys has basically a photographic memory. He remembers every single thing he's ever read, specifically read. So when they go abroad, for example, he knows how to read and write in foreign languages, but he can't speak them, and he can't understand them when other people are speaking to him. So they meet with a guy who speaks Portuguese, but can't read or write. And this boy can read and write in Portuguese, but can't speak or listen to it. So he's very smart, but can't necessarily apply that in all scenarios. And so all 4 of these characters sort of balance each other out, and each of their strengths is another person's weakness. But there are two boys and 2 girls. The 2 boys are sort of, I guess, the stereotypes of book smart. One, as I said, photographic memory, remembers everything he's ever read. The other one is very good at riddles. The 2 girls, one of them is not the trope of the strong female character, but she's very athletically gifted. She's very good at running, jumping, climbing, things like that. She carries every single piece of equipment she owns in a bright red bucket. She is the most 3-dimensional sort of representation of that trope that I have read in a book. She has her own struggles. She has her own character development and character arc, which is all about learning to wait for other people and not try and do everything on her own. Just because she is the fastest runner or the strongest climber or the best swimmer doesn't mean that she can do everything on her own, and it doesn't mean that she shouldn't slow down and wait for the others to catch up with her. So she has this really nice character arc. And the other girl is a literal toddler in the first book. She's like 2 years old, 3 years old, but she's psychic. She can like read minds and stuff, and she's a poet.
Right.
So she comes up with these really rude and nasty poems about people, and it's hilarious. I love her to pieces. So between the four of them, they sort of all cover each other's backs, and they all have strengths where the others have weaknesses, and they all have these independent character arcs that revolve around them learning how to work together, and how to work as a team, how to cover each other's backs, and how to value their own strengths, but also the strengths of others, regardless of whether they sort of fit what they value personally as making them strong people. They all have these crippling doubts about themselves, which is quite funny. They all think that they are the worst person on the planet. Except the toddler, who thinks she is the best person on the planet, and that's why she makes the nasty poems about everyone. But even the adults have sort of similar things. There are female characters among the adults who are very smart, but also have their own faults that they work on. It's a very well-rounded book series. There are characters of all different types on all different sides. It focuses a lot on found family in particular, because all of the children are either orphans or have been abandoned in some way by their families or failed by their adults.
Right.
And about learning to forgive and learning how to accept that family and that love for yourself. They're great books. They are on my future teacher bookshelf. So I highly recommend if people haven't read them. Don't necessarily recommend the Disney series as your first introduction to them, but they're very good.
Well, I mean, honestly, it's rare that anyone ever recommends the adaptation as the first intro to anything.
Yeah.
But I guess it's always I think the problem is when you're talking about older book series, like example for me, it's Noel Holmes. For you, it's this. When you're talking about older book series, sometimes the only way people get exposed to it is through, the adaptations.
Yeah.
But yeah, exactly. And so I feel like I guess it's just like we said before, the age range that these books are supposed to appeal to. When you read them when you're older, you're like, wow, these have so much more substance than most of the books I've read recently. How did this happen?
The best thing about teaching is that you get to go back and read all the books that you read as a kid and no one can judge you.
Right.
Because you teach children.
It's like, oh no, this is for school.
This is work, I promise.
This is for the kids, I swear.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, other than that, I really can't think of many other I guess. Well, to be fair, I feel like our media typically, I mean, as of late, is oversaturated with superhero movies and very. It's not just that, but franchise movies. That's what's really
You don't get standalone things anymore.
And I think the problem is when it comes to a franchise sort of situation, they're banking on the fact that you care about the franchise as a whole rather than the actual characters themselves.
Yeah.
So you start to lose the substance of the character, and they put more emphasis into the world building than they do into the actual, I guess, writing.
Yeah, and you quite often see with these big franchises that the individual installments have more in the way of nods to the big overarching plot, more so than they do a compelling and coherent internal plot within that installment.
Yeah, for sure.
There's very little in the way of character-driven plots in these big franchises, which is a shame because character-driven plots are the best plots, objectively.
For sure.
And
I think as well, I mean, for me, especially when it comes standalones and books is what I've been looking into recently because they're just, they're a full beginning, middle, end, and there's closure. There's an arc and there's closure, and there's no backstepping on, I mean, like me, I'm a huge comic reader, and like the most painful thing is like there's no such thing as an arc. There's no character arcs because they all get
Yeah.
to step on another and then go back and then they do cartwheels and then they just kind of throw themselves out windows.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's no consistency, I guess. And I guess
When
that's
you
the
see a
beauty of
reference
the
to something in a comic book and then it's got that little asterisk next to it, and at the bottom it's like, see this other comic that you don't have
oh my god.
and
Yeah,
haven't read, and you're like, well, that clears up nothing.
for sure. And also I just the main thing is like the retcons and the different writers and again and again and again, like the same either the same story is being hammered out a million times over, or it's like there's so much inconsistency that there is no story, and it's just
Yeah.
like there's some characters that you want to build more, they want to hear more about them, go more in depth in their character, but every time they do go into it, it gets, retconned. But
Yeah.
at the same time, that is the beauty of the comic. That is one of like, the most beautiful things about the comic industry and like just comics in general. The actual media itself is meant to change and change rapidly. And that's its
Yes.
point, and that's some of the, because of its mass production and also its like in rapidness, but still, ability to tell a story. It's able to appeal to wider audiences now, because comics now, because they're so rapidly produced and because they go so far, it's it's easy for they know that their audience is growing, and they're working on appealing to larger audiences, especially because they're also you know bringing in new writers, the writers that come from more diverse backgrounds, that so they are actively also looking to pull more like not just give out more diverse stories, but also make like pull in more people who are diverse into their actual business model, I guess. But
Yeah.
besides comics, I one of the things for me is like you said, standalones and also limited series, like limited TV series. Those
Yes.
also allow for a lot more character. For example, The Haunting of Hill House, and also The Haunting of Bly Manor. Both of those, like, insane. The whole thing is driven by the characters, especially Haunting of Hill House. Like the horror itself. It's the horror itself is is the anxiety over the family. Like each individual character, each especially the female characters. Each of them have so much depth to them. I don't think any of them actually have any sort of physical altercations, as far as I remember, but they all have like their own strengths and weaknesses, and that storytelling, that emotional baggage, all of that ties into their arc as a character throughout the story, and
Yeah.
each of them have so much substance to them.
Which is really
And I think
great to see.
exactly, and that's the thing, like there are those stories out there, but I think when you're forced to have these stories told in a way that they are being constantly produced, like a TV show that doesn't have an end date, or a franchise that just wants to keep pushing out movies to get the money.
Yeah.
Those kinds of stories inherently kind of have to stall their character development and their character arcs and all of that writing just so that they can draw it out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. I do think you're right. Um, all of your opinions are correct, which is why before we wrap up, opinions on Eowyn from Lord of the Rings,
Oh, okay.
specifically
I
from the book,
okay, yeah, from the book.
because the movies
Honestly,
is quite a different plot line for her.
for
So
sure, for sure. Honestly, I gotta think about this.
yeah, I kind of threw that one on you.
I I want to say that she's not the fan servicey kind of, strong female character.
Yeah.
I want to say that because I feel like her motivations have always been more like towards her family,
Yes.
protecting people in a more like, and I think because it's coming from like a more, family oriented sort of, not motherly, but like sisterly sort of like, caretaker role. That's something that's typically associated with women. I still feel like even though her character is literally a fighter and like
Yeah.
is kind of a bit more of a brasher female in a way that like we said is kind of overdone. I feel like hers is a good way to do it, because her motivations are not the same.
Yeah,
It's
I
like
feel
it feels
like
like to her.
yeah, I feel like she kind of tricks you into thinking that is going to be that strong female character archetype, that
Yeah.
trope, the TM version of it. But then
Hmm.
the fact that it sort of subverts itself is quite nice, I think, and it makes her
Yeah.
into a stronger character for it. Not in terms of like physically strong. We know
Yeah.
she's physically
Yeah.
strong because she beats people up on the battlefield. She's
Yeah.
awesome, but she can be physically strong and also go into healing and the more traditionally feminine arts. And that's not a betrayal of her character, that's a
Yeah.
development of her character, because
Absolutely.
her entire arc is about learning how to value those things.
Absolutely.
Whereas before, growing up in a household of all men, where the fighting is all like that's what is valued, the
Yeah.
physical pursuits,
Hmm.
her learning how to value the things that she always thought were not beneath her but like
Not as valuable.
not as
Useless.
valuable is
Yeah.
really important. So I like her as a
Absolutely.
character.
No, I
I know
think
that a lot of
honestly,
people think that it's sort of a betrayal that that's how her arc ends,
no,
but
I
I
can't, I
don't.
cannot feel
I
that. I
like it.
cannot feel that. I literally cannot get myself to believe that it's a betrayal of it. Because how can you say that? How can you say that it's like I
The
don't.
people who say that are normally the types of people who like the strong female character
Yes, exactly.
TM.
That's the thing. How, you're still equating having some sort of like masculine and like strength and like fightingness, all the thing we were talking about, all of that. Like, how can
Yeah,
you're still equating all of that as being better than it's literally just like, oh well, the good thing was that she wasn't like other girls, and now she is like other girls. What have you done? And it's like, well, why are we assuming that other girls is all one thing? Like, why are we
yeah,
assuming that is one small little box? Like, why are we thinking like, why can't we understand that other girls is a very, very vast and deep and incredibly large group of people and that have so many different strengths and weaknesses and aspects to them like across cultures and ethnicities. And, it's like it's just, every individual person has so much more to them. And to just say that like, oh, you're just like other girls. How do you what? Like
yeah,
I don't understand how you don't recognize that being as putting yourself in a box,
yeah.
you know?
And like, I feel like the people who say that are basically just Eowyn pre-character development. Like, you are the worst iteration of this character. Make
Yes.
yourself better.
It's so sad. It's like this is a good character arc and you're telling people that it's bad and so then people don't write it anymore and then we get stuck with more bad writing. And it's
Yes.
just so frustrating. It's so frustrating to see that people thinking that like somehow I mean, I just want to know. I just want to know. Apparently being a healer is a weak thing. Okay, next time you get your ass beat, don't come talk to me about,
Yeah.
"Oh, I'm injured." Okay, bitch, I thought you said I was weak. Like
These are the kinds of people
who's
who
weak
play.
now?
These
Figure
are
it
the
out,
kinds of
bitch.
people who play D&D and are either fighters, barbarians, or wizards who only know how to cast fireball. Uh,
And I'm telling you
and
right
like
now,
to
you
have a
want
party with 0 healers in it. And it's like,
that's how you get a TPK,
how you
baby. That's how you
die.
get a yes, exactly. That's how you get a TPK. And not just that, I'm just telling you right now, you ever play with me and you gonna act like that, I'm telling you right now, no healing words are going out except
Yeah.
for on myself. 'Cause nobody respects me, apparently. And I just like issue with being like physically strong. There's no issue with like wanting to fight, wanting to do like there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that you cannot do that or like you cannot want that. That is absolutely not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is like the idea that that is the only way to be a character that is worth reading about, or worth seeing on screen or worth hearing about period is really really damaging
Yes.
as a society.
It is. I agree. It's just, I hate it so much. And how are we going to get out of this hole? We're not
I
really, I don't
Exactly. And I
think.
think I don't. There's really. It's so hard because, again, like you said, it's the self-perpetuating cycle. You know, the self-fulfilling prophecy. Just people. More people putting it out, and like that's all people are reading because that's all that's going out. And then like again and again and again, we just keep going through this tumble dry
Yeah.
process. And, yeah, I just feel like there's so much that needs to be done on a story. Like, first of all, creative writing classes need to talk more about this. People need to talk more about, you know, feminism, not in its Western, because I really don't, vibe with Western feminism, but like the idea of feminism and its, storytelling and diversity and all those things and having depth in a story rather than just something that will sell. And I think that's really sad because like the only way to really get these stories out there is to take away the financial, like the incentive sort of to write these
Yeah.
stories, which is like get a book out, get money, you know?
When
Because that is
really, like, looking at how much authors earn in a year, no one should go into that thinking they're going to make money.
that's my
Because
thing,
they
It's like
don't.
I feel like if you have a story to write, you have to write from your heart. You have to feel like it's a good story, you know? And I feel like a lot of people water down what they want to tell as a story because they're worried of how it will be perceived in the public.
Yeah.
And I just feel like, honestly, there are so many books. You go into a Barnes and Noble or any sort of like bookseller store, there are so many books. Most of them do not get sold. Be like it takes forever for books to get sold.
Yeah.
Your books are next to millions and millions of other writers. Like, be real with yourself. I'm not telling you don't write, but I'm saying like looking at how many books there are, it's not like your book is not going to go viral unless it's the same formula as every other book that's gone viral. And I think that's the
Yes.
problem. And I think that if you want to tell a good, compelling story, you have to stop looking at it as a sort of, a selling point and rather look at it as like this is what I wanted to write. And I think that's
Yeah.
why sometimes fan fiction has a lot more depth and, it sometimes is a more emotionally appealing read
Yeah.
in some situations because these authors are writing for themselves rather
Yeah.
than sort of commercial, situation where they're trying to sell.
Yeah,
So I
definitely.
think
There's
it's just
there's so much love involved
mhm,
in any kind of fan content,
exactly.
whether it's love for the source material or love for the art of writing, I guess, or love for the community that you are writing into, um,
Yeah.
or
And
if you're writing like some kind of AU or some kind of like crossover slash fusion type thing. So there's got to be so much love in there for what you are writing and how you are writing it that I think often does not come across in commercial fiction because it's commercial. You don't start writing fanfic expecting to make any money because that's illegal.
exactly. Yeah.
You are doing that all for free. And I think, like, for all that, there's sort of this stereotype that fan fiction is inherently lesser and that writers who start in fan communities and then go on to commercial fiction are inherently worse at writing and their books aren't as good. I think that's not necessarily true. I just think that it's a different genre in and of itself. Like, for all that there is some like fanfic out there that's got this amazing world building and it's got really good character development and it's got good plot and all of that. It's got all these like individual things that are included in commercial fiction as well that are by themselves really good. I think there's something about the structure and the way fan fiction is written that makes it very different from the stuff that you would pick up off the shelves of a bookshop. So
Yes, absolutely.
like that's where I think the fan
Disconnect
fiction
is.
is worse opinion comes from,
Yeah.
just because it's
Mhm.
different. Um,
It's a
but
different style
yeah,
entirely. It really is. And I
yeah,
think that I think that's because like again, in fan fiction is where you can find like a good character driven art, but like, hey, what are you gonna do about the mainstream stuff. Like, what are you going to
Yeah.
do about the books that are being published, the movies that are being made, the TV shows that are being shown? Like, how do you begin to even change that?
Yeah.
Especially when those things typically don't do well. You
Yes.
know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
how can you
I
change that
mean,
when those things aren't
you've
the ones that get.
mentioned everything everywhere all at once a few times now, and I think that is the exception to the rule
That
in
is
that
literally
it is a
so sad.
standalone thing that has nothing to do with the franchise or any kind of like really big production type thing. And it has swept up at all the awards and is incredibly popular. So I think that is
Yeah.
possibly the sole exception to what we are saying, is that in the it
But
is
it is
breaking all
so.
those boundaries. But I don't know that we'd see something else like that. Just because one movie did it doesn't mean that the whole industry is going to change. It just means that one movie did it. We need to see the same thing happening year in, year out before anything's going to start changing,
Absolutely.
which is a shame because I would love to see more movies like that.
Yes, I would love to see things that aren't the same formula over and over again.
Yes.
And I just think that at the same time, on a bit of a lighter note, I do believe that because indie movies have like Everything Everywhere All at Once and The Banshees of Inisherin, that's not one that I'm talking about a strong female character, but just in general, that is another
Yeah.
movie that exists. That is an indie movie that did get popular, and that we are seeing a lot more indie movies, is what I'm saying. That they are
Yes.
pushing forward against like the typical franchise grain, and like against Disney, against your typical Fox and this and that and the other, and DreamWorks, all those things. And I'm not
Yeah.
saying that those companies can't come out with good movies. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish was the best movie I've seen in my life. Fundamentally changed me as a person. But also, the Batman 2022 has also done this. Currently wearing a shirt for that movie. I'm not saying those franchises can't come up with great movies, but I'm saying is like it's the same companies, the same stories over and over again. Like
Yeah.
it's very hard to have a fresh take on something without it not going well. For example, Turning Red by Disney, a fresh take, something that we haven't seen from Disney ever before, I don't believe.
No.
It's one of the most different movies that I've seen from Disney, especially animation as well. And yet, it is something that did not do well publicly because it talked about things that were quote unquote taboo, or things
Mm.
that was too cringe for some people because of the age range that the people. But I mean, that's the thing, right? Like those different viewpoints, those different stories, all those things that make a unique story do not do well in franchises, and so it's really great to see it happening in indie movies, and it's really great to see not only that they're happening, but also that they are actually getting some sort of popularity. So I do believe
Yes.
that indie movies will continue to keep pushing, and I do believe that we will be seeing more of them, and hopefully we will be seeing better, more and more movies being Oscar nominated, and like actually getting the publicity and the views and all of that sort of popularity that allows us to actually get to see more a deeper lean into the diverse and you know I guess more substantial stories that we are seeing through these
Yeah. So there is
directors.
hope, which is good.
I believe there's hope. I do believe there's hope. I just
Yes.
think that it's going to take some pushing
Yes. We all need
and
to
a lot
work
of
very
me
hard.
preaching on soapboxes in the middle of the mall like a crazy
Yes.
person. But yeah, I just it's also really funny because as a person I'm like, oh, this, I feel like my opinion is something that I feel like a lot of people have, but again, I also feel that way because I have two sisters who have the same opinions as me in this matters. So it's just me in like an echo booth
Yeah.
hearing the same thing over and over again, and I'm like, yeah, everyone thinks this, right? And turns out they don't, and it's so hard to get book and movie recommendations from other people because of this very reason. Because I'm like,
Yes.
oh, okay, that sounds good, and then I start reading, and I'm like, oh, it's one of these. But
Yeah.
yeah, I just think that like there is, obviously there are people out there who do, think that there should be changes and like they need to be more um different stories being told, more substantial stories being told. And I do think that that's also happening though because like we have, more of the world and more people with different backgrounds and stories of their own to tell have more access to, making these stories and like more access to producing and writing and all these things. And I think that is probably the key way that, these changes that we really want to see, these actually progressive, changes that we want to see in these characters and these stories, the way that we'll see it is by making, the arts and writing and producing and all of these things more accessible and more widespread for
Yes.
people. That's how you get it. That's how you get it done.
Yes.
You have to spread it.
So I think the moral of this very long story is be
Oh
the
my God,
change that
yeah.
you want to see in the world.
Absolutely. Be
if you
unapologetically
two
yourself.
are unsatisfied with the stuff that you are reading and the stuff that you are watching, go write stuff.
Yeah, if you feel like it's all the same, make it different.
Yeah.
You know what it is that you keep reading and you keep thinking, "Wow, I've seen this a million times before. This is not very interesting." You know what would be interesting then. You know what you want to see. And I feel
Yeah.
like you need to lean into that part of yourself that wants to see difference, that wants to see something exciting, something new. The novelty, you have to not be afraid of the novelty and the fact that it may not be received well and have to push for something that you're proud of, you know?
Yes.
Something that you feel like, yeah, I wrote that and I feel like no one else could have written that.
If you love the
Because
thing that you're
everyone does that, yeah.
writing, other people will be able to tell and they will love it too. Which is, I think, one of the really nice things about writing as an art. Yeah. So.
Yeah, you don't have to appeal to every audience. You need to appeal to your audience, and that will
Which is
show.
primarily you. you know, your audience
Trying.
is first of all you. Second of all, the people who you foist your work upon and say, please read it and tell me if it's good. And then
Yeah,
it's about the general public.
absolutely. I feel like trying to appeal to everyone is gonna make you just feel like you did a shit job always. You
Yeah.
can't please everyone, and you don't need to please
You
everyone.
can't please everyone.
Exactly, absolutely cannot. There's no way in hell you're gonna have a book that you're gonna put out there, or you're gonna have a movie that you're gonna put out there, and everyone's gonna be like, "Wow, this is the best thing ever," except for Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. But there's no way you're gonna get that. But you
Yeah.
have to try. You have to try, and not like you have to try for yourself. You have to try to appeal to yourself. You can't try to appeal to everyone else. It's just for you. It's a personal experience, personal exploration.
Yes. Writing is a thing of beauty. Try it out. And then I guess tell us what you think of it. It's probably going to be this is the
Yeah.
most frustrating hobby in the world. How do you manage it? The answer is we don't.
Yeah.
Uh, we just get little brain worms and then write them down.
Absolutely. Wait. Okay. Quick question. Sorry. Do you guys have an ask box?
We do on Tumblr. We have so
Great. Do you guys
the
actually get
podcast
like
has a
ask?
blog on Tumblr, and that blog has an ask box. Anchor, which is our hosting platform, also apparently has an option where you can do Q&As at the end of episodes. So if
Okay.
you have questions, you can put them in there. But I would recommend going to Tumblr first because I don't know how this Q&A thing actually works. I just got a notification about it pop up a few days ago. But I do know how Tumblr asks work, so please do that first.
But yeah, no, I was just gonna say, I want to hear what other people think. Like, what are other people like? I want to hear what other people find as really good, strong, like, a really good female lead character, and like movies or TV shows or books that you've seen, like the absolute worst strong
Yes.
female character TM you have ever seen in your entire life. I want to hear, I want to know because
And
I
on
know
that,
I've seen a bunch, but
yeah.
I need to know what the worst one for you was.
And on that note, where can people
Sorry.
find you? They know where to
Me?
find us generally, but where can they find you specifically to give you all of this feedback?
Okay, well, I have a Tumblr at Red Hood Redemption. There's a dash in between, like a hyphen in between each word.
Yeah.
But it's all lowercase. And you can find me on Tumblr. Yeah, that's about it. I don't do Twitter.
None of us do. It's a dumpster fire. Your
Yeah,
job
exactly.
now is to wrap us up and head us out.
Well, on that note, that was what I like and dislike actually about a strong female character trope and how it could be perfect if we all, I guess, worked harder on, spreading it to a more diverse audience.
Yeah.
Um, and that's that.
Yeah. So it is goodbye from me.
And
And
a
I guess
goodbye from
goodbye
me.
from you. Wonderful. Thank you so much for listening. If you've made it all the way to the end, congrats! You are officially much stronger than half of our friends. If you are enjoying listening to this podcast, please subscribe to get notified when we update, or follow us on Tumblr at HeyILike, all lowercase. That's all for now. See you next time on Hey, I Like.